Planning Development Committee, January 18th. This meeting will be held through remote electronic participation in accordance with Municipal Act 2001. City Council has authorized virtual meetings of its committees with members participating remotely to facilitate the continuation of city business during the current pandemic. I'll hand it over to the City Clerk, who will be doing a roll call for today's attendance.
Members of committee, I will call your names. Please indicate your presence. Councillor Fortini.
I'm here, Pierre.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Present.
Councillor Vasante.
I'm here.
Councillor Willens.
I am here.
Councillor Paleshi.
Present.
Councillor Bowman.
Present.
Councillor Williams.
Present.
Councillor Singh. Don't believe he's present at the moment. And Councillor Dillon, who I do not see in the meeting at the moment. And the chair is present. So, Mr. Chair, there are 8 members present. You do have quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next item is approval of the agenda. Does any member wish to add a business item to tonight's meeting? You can use the chat function. I see none. So we do have a motion moved by Councillor Vicente to approve the agenda, that the agenda for regular Planning and Development Committee meeting of January 18th, 2021 be approved. Is there anyone that opposes? No? Okay, there are no objections, so the motion carries. And we'll move on just very quickly. As you know, that meetings of municipal councils are to be open to the public for transparency and accountability, and our meeting will continue to be as well with a few precautions and limitations. As you know, no in-person attendance is very limited, and members and staff are participating electronically in this meeting. The public can still access and participate in the meeting in a number of ways, watching this meeting remotely through the city's live stream and playback of the archived video stream, registering with the city clerk's office as a virtual delegate to participate in a meeting, or submitting questions about the agenda business and decisions made by council today, emailing the city clerk's office at cityclerksoffice@brampton.ca with your question, which may be read into the public meeting record during 15-minute public question period before the end of the meeting. Also, to continue to follow important service and public health updates through the city's website, brampton.ca, which include updated information on the city's response, as well as links to other important sources of information, including Region of Peel Public Health, Province of Ontario, and Government of Canada. Final reminder to members of committee before we start to consider today's agenda business, please ensure your video is off and microphone is muted until you are assigned the floor. Then you can turn both on when you speak. This will help ensure only one person is speaking at one time. Declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act for any matter to be considered on today's agenda?
Sorry, Councillor Medeiros, it's Councillor Dillon. Sorry, I was just having trouble logging in. I'm just letting you know that I'm here.
Oh, okay. So it's not regarding conflict of interest.
No.
So noted by the city clerk. Thank you very much, Councillor Dillon. Seeing that there's none, the clerk will know for meeting minutes. Consent motion. The items listed with an asterisk on the agenda are considered to be routine and non-controversial. The consent motion is to adopt these matters on today's agenda without the need for a separate discussion on the items unless a member requests a separate discussion. Does any member wish to add an item or remove an item from the consent motion today? Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I didn't get my chat box. I think we have to, I'm going to ask the clerk to do for 7.2 for a revised motion. 7.5, do we do it now or we do it after when the item comes up?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would suggest you deal with it at the time the item comes up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as I see nobody, then I do have a motion moved by Councillor Bowman to approve the consent agenda as is. Is there anyone opposed? No? Okay, there are no objections, so the motion carries. Our next section of tonight's agenda is a statutory public meeting. This is a public meeting of the Planning Development Committee held in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act of Ontario. The proposals to be heard at this public meeting are the result of applications made under the Planning Act. These are not proposals of the City of Brampton unless they are specifically identified as city-initiated proposals. Tonight we have 2 city-initiated proposals, items 5.1 and 5.2, as part of tonight's statutory public meeting. The intent of this public meeting is to receive submissions from the public regarding these proposals. Given we may have persons watching this meeting through the city's live stream, we will have staff present each proposal subject to a statutory public meeting unless committee decides otherwise. After receiving any pre-registered delegations, members of the committee may ask questions for clarification, but will not engage in debate on this proposal at this time. Committee consideration of the proposal will occur at a future meeting with planning staff bring forward final recommendation report on each proposal. Again, the city has posted it onto its website supporting information and documentation for these development applications for public review and reference. We will now need to proceed to consider the 6 items on this evening's statutory public meeting agenda. After consideration of the public meetings items, committee will deal with the balance of the agenda item on tonight's agenda. So our first one, I'll hand it over to Michelle Gervais, Policy Planner, Planning, Building, and Economic Development, regarding a staff report, city-initiated amendment to the zoning bylaw to eliminate minimum parking requirements in the downtown central area and her Ontario main corridor. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Michelle Gervais, and I am the planner responsible for managing this city-initiated amendment to the city's parking requirements in the zoning bylaw. The purpose of this public meeting is to provide information to the public and seek feedback on the city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment. No decision will be made this evening. Next slide. The proposed amendment will apply to the downtown, the central area, and lands located along the Hurontario main corridor as shown on this slide. Next slide, please. In terms of process to date, staff received direction from council in December of 2020 to proceed with this city-initiated amendment. Notice of the public meeting was provided in the Brampton Guardian on December the 17th, and tonight we are here at the public meeting stage. Next slide, please. In terms of some background, elimination of minimum parking requirements within certain locations or for specific uses or even citywide is occurring more frequently within North American cities as there's an evolving understanding that lifestyles are changing, parking requirements are outdated, and that providing an oversupply of parking has had a negative impact on the built form, on housing affordability, and on the environment. And at the bottom of the screen, there are a few logos from a few municipalities in North America that have removed minimum parking requirements. In 2016, the city of Buffalo in New York approved an ordinance to completely remove the requirement to provide off-street parking. In June 2020, Edmonton became the first major Canadian municipality to eliminate all minimum parking requirements. And in November 2020, Calgary removed minimum parking requirements for non-residential uses from their land use bylaw. Next slide, please. So the city is just about to undertake on a citywide parking strategy to help develop a comprehensive parking policy, parking management, and implementation framework for Brampton. This is expected to be completed by Q4 of 2022. In advance of the citywide parking strategy being completed, Council has expressed an interest in eliminating minimum parking requirements in areas of the city that are planned for intensification and that are also well served by transit. Next slide, please. So a report entitled City Initiated Zoning Bylaw Amendments to Modernize Parking Standards was approved by Council in December of 2020, along with the adoption of an implementing zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw amendment that was passed by Council in December, and which is now in full force and effect, amended parking requirements for some residential, commercial, and office uses citywide. It added bicycle parking and maximum surface parking requirements for an apartment dwelling in the central area. And it provided a permanent parking exemption for commercial and office uses in the downtown. This recommendation report that was approved by Council in December of 2020 also recommended that staff hold a statutory public meeting to present a city-initiated zoning bylaw amendment to eliminate minimum parking requirements for specific uses within the downtown, central area, and the Hurontario main corridor. Next slide, please. As previously mentioned, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment being presented tonight is to propose an elimination of minimum parking requirements in 3 key areas of the city: downtown, central area, and here Ontario main corridor. These areas are identified in the official plan as providing opportunities for intensive transit supportive development, and they have convenient access to existing or planned high order transit. These 3 areas represent a logical starting point for proposing an elimination to the minimum residential parking requirements. Other potential areas of the city where minimum parking requirements could be eliminated will be reviewed in more detail through the citywide parking strategy and through the ongoing official plan and zoning bylaw review process. Next slide, please. So specifically, this is not a full removal of minimum parking requirements. Parking for a single detached, semi-detached, duplex, triplex, double duplex, street townhouse dwelling, 2-unit dwellings, lodging houses, and senior citizen residents will still be required to be provided in accordance with the zoning bylaw. Surface parking and bicycle parking for an apartment dwelling are proposed to be required in accordance with the zoning bylaw. And requirements for surface and bicycle parking were approved by council in December 2020 for the downtown and central area, and it is proposed that these standards apply to the Huron-Ontario main corridor. It is also proposed that a minimum visitor parking rate of 0.2 parking spaces per residential unit apply to an apartment dwelling unit, multiple residential dwelling unit, townhouse unit, that has without a private garage or driveway. And just to highlight that the proposal to remove parking minimums does not necessarily mean that no parking will be provided. The intent is that it will allow an owner, whether for a business owner or a residential developer owner, to provide parking where it is necessary and where it is considered markable to do so. Next slide. Okay. Is the intent that with the proposed elimination of minimum parking requirements in certain areas of the city, that the following long-term objectives would be achieved: a more efficient use of land, the development of affordable housing, a built form that encourages walking, cycling, and transit, spaces that are designed for people rather than for vehicles, and help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this aligns with a number of city initiatives: Brampton 2040 Vision, the Active Transportation Master Plan, city's housing strategy, that's ongoing, the Community Energy and Emissions Reduction Plan, and the ongoing work associated with Complete Streets. A complete analysis of the objectives associated with the proposed zoning amendment will be discussed further in the future recommendation report. Next slide, please. So the next steps are to review and assess any comments received from the public and any technical comments from internal divisions. I'll prepare a final recommendation report and zoning bylaw amendment to council that will address conformity with provincial policies and address any comments received from members of the public. I will contact and follow up with those residents who have spoken, written in, or advised of an interest in this city-initiated amendment. Next slide, please. The report associated with tonight's meeting is available online, and the presentation will be available online shortly. My name and my contact information is posted on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. To the city clerk, do we have any delegations or registered speakers?
Mr. Chair, we do. We have received a delegation request from Sylvia Roberts. Sylvia is going to be brought into the meeting now, and there is a presentation that she's going to be presenting.
Okay, thank you very much, city clerk.
So I'll just get that up on the screen momentarily here. Sylvia, you are in the meeting. You can proceed, and you have 5 minutes.
All right. Good evening. My name is Sylvia Roberts. I'm a resident of Ward 3. The city's parking saga continues. Next slide. So I've been hearing about the city's parking strategy, and I've noticed it has finally gone out for RFP, and that's good. However, I have concerns with how quickly this is going to happen. The city for the downtown maintained a temporary parking bylaw to reduce it for non-residential purposes for literally decades before they made it permanent. And it wasn't staff that decided to say, hey, after having this temporary thing permanent for literally decades, we should make it permanent. No, it was council that had to tell them, do it. Our official plan review process started in 2012. I think we're currently planning this time for real to have it done by 2022. It's supposed to be done every 10 years, not 8, 10 years. Mississauga did a parking strategy too, and in Peel, as they're also in Peel Region, they're a reasonable comparison. It did take them 2 years, as the planning department was proposing. However, after they did that, they're now saying, okay, now we're going to take 2 to 5 years to come up with the new minimums. That's in their document. The development timelines for major projects, for whether it's office, residential, can easily take a decade or more. And while ones that are already in the queue can take advantage of reduced parking minimums, to actually see development come through can take another 10 years. So the reality is, if this goes as fast as Mississauga is talking about it, this is only really going to take effect in the 2030s. The lenders are conservative, so you're not going to see huge reductions. You're going to see incremental steps as developers manage to sell projects. So again, this is going to be the 2030s before anything really happens. The Queen Street BRT is coming back. IPC did great. I'm fairly confident we should be able to get this going. And the region is talking about this in 2020, 25, mid-2020s. This could be done before we've actually implemented our new parking minimums. And this only affects less than 7 kilometers, but the BRT section proposed in Brampton is over 18 kilometers. Calgary, in 6 months, eliminated its parking minimums for the commercial, for non-residential uses, because they looked at Edmonton's work and decided, why reinvent the wheel? Let's use other people's work, and because they actually understood it. We have a pandemic going on. It's very difficult for businesses right now. I was looking at patios, for example, before COVID hit, and when I went and talked to the development permit, they're like, well, it wouldn't matter if you allowed cities to put in patios, because none of them have space because they're maxed out on parking anyway. Next slide. So I'm not saying the city should be a leader and blaze a new path. I'm just saying, can we please look at industry standards? There is a municipal standard for parking in transit. It's in the US, it's a quarter mile that works out to about 400 meters. And we see it here too, in Canada. You get a frequent transit definition. This is usually 15 minutes all day. You take a watch distance, which is normally 400 meters or in metric. The transit department creates a map of the stops, hand this list over to the GIS department, and they plot the walk sheds. And then after they do that, they just review the map annually. Next slide. There's one more slide after that. There we go. This is a map that Seattle puts out, and this shows where they have it. They actually identify every single parcel in the municipality where the rules apply to. It's not that hard, and if you check below, there's exactly how Seattle does it, how they go about creating and updating the map. Thank you. That's my delegation.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any members of the committee have any questions for the delegation? Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. We now move on to members of committee. Do any questions of clarification? I do see that Councillor Santos is the only one on the board. Go ahead, Councillor Santos.
I'm on, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Fortini was before me.
Oh, my apologies. Go ahead, Councillor Fortini.
Yeah, thank you, through the chair to staff. I thought when we were looking at these parking, and Sylvia brings a good point. I thought it was we were going to look at all across Brampton on transit line. Did we look at that, or we're just looking at a certain area? That's what I'm figuring out. Anywhere with transit line, we were looking at the parking.
Through the chair, it's Michelle, to Councillor Fortini. In the report that staff had brought forward in December, we did identify just those 3 specific areas that we were going to concentrate on eliminating parking requirements. And that was the downtown central area and here Ontario main corridor. And those boundaries are as defined in our official plan. And just given the limited amount of time that we had with respect to when we received this direction to look at doing this, we felt it was best to keep it limited to these defined areas, which we do feel are areas where there will be strong intensification and where there is, access to transit.
So if we look at the downtown, and I get like we will look at the parking, but at the end of the day, if we can't build because of the floodplain and we're looking at certain area, how are we going to build down there? Well, along Queen Street, which is a major transit line, I thought my thought was we're going to look at everywhere across the city to eliminate the parking. So maybe I was wrong, but that's what was my intention. And I like to see going across the city anywhere there's a transit line, because how much can we build downtown when we have this floodplain? Say we can't build unless we get this river walk, and we keep focusing downtown, and it would be great if we could build, but we can't at this time. But we could at least push some other areas. So I'd like to see right across the city, anywhere where there's a transit line, especially Queen Street.
Bob Bjerke here. Through the chair, Councillor, the comprehensive parking strategy, which I think the delegate had indicated is out for RFP, is intended to provide that at least the first phase will provide guidance on parking for these kinds of things by the end of the year. And then the study is intended to be fully complete with recommendations by the end of next year. But as we're going through the specific area reviews and the comprehensive zoning bylaw updates, DOP, we also know the direction we want to head to is exactly that. And right now, the Queen Street, at least west of the 410, is included in the area that's been identified. So we know a lot of areas, especially Shoppers World, where we've got a significant amount of development and infill activity is included. And there are opportunities for us to pursue this on an ad hoc basis, if you like, as people bring forward suggestions for lower parking minimums on their projects. We can consider those. But as Michelle's indicated, initially this was the most straightforward boundaries to use, where we know the transit is there, and that we also know that the development is happening. And then we'll implement the rest through the bulk of by the end of this year and then into next year to do the rest of the city and in a comprehensive way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fortini. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'm very pleased to see this report and the presentation coming forward and to see this implemented. I think the minimum parking requirements, as Councillor Vicente and I and other folks have discussed in the past, have been a disincentive for some development projects. And now with the Riverwalk coming in, we know that there will be development happening in the near future. I do agree with you, Sylvia, with respect to Brampton being a leader, and I actually think that we should be blazing a new path. And so with respect to the timing of the implementation on this, it would be great if it happens sooner rather than later. My question to staff, or recommendation to staff, even though it's somewhat contrary to what we are proposing here, I worry, is whether or not you have engaged feedback from the BIA and some of the local small businesses in downtown. I know, being a board member of the BIA, sometimes our small businesses are always concerned about parking, and I just want to make sure that they are engaged in the process.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Santos. We haven't specifically engaged with the BA, but we can definitely advise them of the amendment, and any comments or suggestions that they may have can be provided right up until we bring this back to Planning Committee and Council for their consideration, which we're targeting to do so in March of this year.
Thank you. That would be great. I think it would just be good to get their feedback ahead of time, and Councillor Medeiros and I, who are board members of the BIA, can kind of stick handle that conversation at the board level of the BIA as well. I think that part of this minimum parking requirements, especially around the downtown corridor and transit corridors, is really to have people walking and activating those spaces versus driving and parking, picking up their stuff and then driving away. We want them to stay longer when the time comes and we're no longer in lockdown. Thanks so much for the presentation.
Okay, thank you. As I see, there's no further.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I see Councillor Fortini. Go, Councillor Fortini, for the second time.
Yes, thank you. Just to ask, so we're stopping at we're along Queen Street to the 410. Is that what we're doing? Staff?
Yeah, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Fortini. The easterly boundaries of the central area go to Bramley Road along Queen Street. Yes.
To Bramley. And if we look at all these applications that are in, there's a lot of them past Bramley Road right to Highway 50. So we cannot add that all the way to Highway 50 on the least on the main on Queen Street, on the main road.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Fortini, we've only given notice for those boundaries as presented tonight. Anything beyond those boundaries most likely would require another public meeting to be held. It doesn't preclude us from looking at those areas, as Bob Bjorky has pointed out, through the parking strategy and through future amendments to the zoning bylaw, but we've specifically only given notice for the boundaries of the central area, which go essentially from McLaughlin Road to Bramley Road along the Queen Street corridor.
But when we brought, my other question is, I don't know, when we brought this forward, then we mentioned to do the study or to do, add all transit line across the city at the time? Or was it to stop at Bramley Road?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Fortini again, yes, the original direction was for us to look at key intensification areas in the city that were served by transit, but we felt that the best boundaries as defined by the OP would be to stick with the central area for now.
Okay, you know, we're trying to get development here. We're trying to make it a lot easier, and I keep saying it over and over that, you know, we're not in Toronto here that people are going to get $2,000 a square foot. And if anywhere we could get more development and businesses over along the transit line, we got to make as much easier as we can for the developers, or else, you know, a lot of them saying, you know, it just doesn't pay to build in Brampton. That's why I was always saying, you know, at least the transit line, the main roads. So I was hoping we could, I don't know if I have to add an amendment to go right through to at least the main road, right to Highway 50. So
Councillor Fortini, I think what you heard is that the staff are open to consider other areas. There would have to be a public meeting component. So as such, as we invite the public to provide any comments, as this is a statutory public meeting, I'm sure that staff will also take any councillor sort of comments who might identify areas which are not currently covered, and certainly staff can come back with some other additional report which would include those other areas in which we would have to have a public meeting. So I think you'd have every opportunity. The problem with this right now, from what I'm getting a sense that if you wanted to provide an amendment could not go forward, as we would need that statutory public meeting. So the suggestion would be is that we continue with what's been identified, but in terms of some of the comments, I think then you'll have an opportunity to meet with staff to discuss other areas or bring it up to where you think there's more development.
yeah, and I get where we're saying, Mr. Chair, but the direction I understood, it was anywhere on transit line, and it looks like we didn't do that. We only did a certain area. Okay, I'll wait till I'll have an offline discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so just before, I guess Bob or Michelle, if you can just confirm then that any councillor from any ward, if there's areas that they identify that meets sort of the criteria we're applying to this, that's something that there would be no issue in developing, I guess, another report which would include different areas based on, and maybe councillors themselves might not understand that there's different developments in those areas which are along transit lines. So I guess that would be okay then. Is that correct?
Sorry, through you to the chair. Yes, I think we've heard from some of the local councillors that perhaps there should be an expansion to the boundaries, but as I had indicated, that would require a further amendment, and it's something definitely that staff can take a look at, and whether or not this is something we advance prior to the parking strategy, or maybe we look at advancing that after the parking strategy. I guess depends on what direction might we receive from council on that matter.
So would it be helpful, Michelle, that if we moved direction as part of receiving this report by Council Fortini to allow staff to go back and consider further expansion based on transit-orientated routes, et cetera, would that be more helpful?
So through the chair, Bob Bierke. So this report follows the December 9th supplementary report, which did identify these areas, and that's what we had suggested, and that was the direction for us to proceed with this public meeting. We can take that as input, certainly, and I think, as Michelle indicated, if we're going to expand it significantly, we would probably need to have another public meeting. So I think the path, because we've always intended to go to the next step and expand it, would be to, I think, bring this forward, get that approved, get it in place. And, if the direction is to move forward more quickly with an expansion to that, we can certainly take that under advisement and try and incorporate that into an earlier phase of the parking strategy, do what we can to kind of accelerate that, particularly in those additional intensification areas. I think it would be helpful to get the amendments that are proposed here in place for the development that's underway, and then come back as quickly as possible with something beyond that.
Okay, thank you. I do see that Sylvia would like to respond to some of the comments by councillors. Okay, Sylvia, I'll allow you to respond after the fact. Go ahead.
Thank you. So there's actually multiple development proposals currently in progress. Tonight, there's one on the Gore Road between Queen and Fogal. And then there's also another one at Queen and McVean. That's just tonight, and they're both along right by where there's going to be, where we're planning for stations for a rapid transit line, but it's outside of the scope of what the planning department has looked at. The BRT IBC for Metrolinx proposes all the way to Mississauga Road, but the setup of downtown only goes to McLaughlin. Over last meeting, just last month, there was a proposal on Queen Street just west of Chinguacousy Road, which already has, Queen Street already has a zoom west of downtown, and Chinguacousy Road is identified as the next zoom. So that's 3 projects in the span of 1 month that are along what's proposed for BRT line. And as far as I know, council wants that BRT, and it wants it as soon as possible. And yet these 3 projects are right by it, but still have the general parking requirement. It doesn't quite make sense. And it doesn't seem like that's what council wanted.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Sylvia. And then I think that our staff understand what some of the council's comments were, and I support their direction and what we're achieving today, because that's based on the direction, but I appreciate your comments. So I do have, then going back to Council Fortini, then are you satisfied with what staff have directed that we do?
Well, I'm satisfied. So, what am I going to do? Like, it's not for the public meeting. I just was hoping, I thought the direction was to go all around along transit line. And like Sylvia said, we got actually 6 applications along Queen Street on the east side of Bramalea. There's going to be, so, but for now, I'm fine with it. And let's move on to the next step, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think staff recognize that this is an important first step, and expansion will be coming, and I would just encourage any other councillor, if they have any further comments, to provide them offline directly to staff, and they'll certainly take that into consideration. So I do have a motion here moved by, I'll give it to Councillor Vicente. I know he's passionate about this issue. A motion moved by Councillor Vicente to approve the staff report recommendations and receive the delegation. That the report titled Information Report City Initiated Zoning Bylaw Amendment to eliminate minimum parking requirements in the downtown central area and her Ontario main corridor to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th be received. The Planning and Economic Development Department staff be directed to report back to Planning Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and final recommendations, and the receipt of the delegation by Sylvia Roberts. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No, so it carries. Thank you very much. Now we move on to item 5.2.
Mr. Chair?
Amendments. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Councillor Singh was having some technical difficulty, so I think he's on the phone. I just need to unmute his mic just to confirm. And just give me a moment, please. Councillor Singh, is that you? I've just unmuted your mic. Councillor Singh? Okay, Mr. Chair, we'll try and connect him. Not
a problem. Thank you.
Okay.
So item 5.2, and again, it's Michelle, so I'll hand it over to you, Michelle, regarding our city-initiated amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm just going to bring up the presentation again. We just have to go back to presenter to bring up the slide deck for this item. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, staff, and members of the public. Again, my name is Michelle Gervais, and I am the planner responsible for managing the proposed city-initiated amendments to the official plan and zoning bylaw. The purpose of this public meeting is to provide information to the public and seek feedback on two city-initiated amendments. One is an amendment to the official plan second unit policies. The second is an amendment to the above grade side door entrance zoning bylaw provision. No decision will be made this evening. These proposed amendments would apply citywide. Next slide, please. So the process to date is that the notice of the public meeting was provided by way of an advertisement in the Brampton Guardian on December the 17th, 2020. And tonight we are at the public meeting stage. Next slide, please. So there was a report entitled Review of Regulatory Model Governing Two-Unit Dwellings, which was approved by Council in October of 2020. This report recommended that staff one, review amending the second unit official plan policies to enable the Committee of Adjustment to consider and approve, where appropriate, minor variance applications involving the two-unit dwelling zoning bylaw provisions. And it also provided direction for staff to review amending the zoning bylaw to only allow an above-grade door in the side yard where there is a minimum 1.2 meter continuous path of travel leading up to and including an above grade side entrance door. Next slide, please. I will first speak to the amendment to the official plan. So in April of 2015, Council adopted a framework for regulating second units, including official plan policies, zoning standards, and a registration bylaw to address the Ontario legislative requirements of Bill 140, which required municipal official plans and zoning bylaws to permit second units in detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings as options for delivering affordable housing. One of the second unit policies in the city's official plan states, where an application for a second unit fails to conform to any of the requirements of the implementing zoning bylaw, a zoning bylaw amendment shall be required. The intent of this official plan policy is that any variation from the two-unit dwelling zoning bylaw provisions, regardless of how minor it may be, shall be addressed by way of a site-specific amendment to the zoning bylaw, which requires Council's approval. Next slide, please. So this amendment to the official plan is proposing to delete this prescriptive second unit official plan policy that requires a zoning bylaw amendment for a second unit application that fails to conform to any of the requirements of the zoning bylaw. The proposed deletion of this policy provides the opportunity for staff to recommend approval and for the Committee of Adjustment to grant a variance from the 2-unit dwelling zoning bylaw regulations where it is determined that the variance meets all of the 4 tests of a minor variance under the Planning Act. Next slide, please. So the second amendment that's being presented tonight is an amendment to the above grade side entrance provision in the zoning bylaw. Currently, the zoning bylaw regulates side yard setbacks for all residential above grade side entrance. And this is the regulation that's taken right from the zoning bylaw. And the current provision reads, the front of an above grade door located on a side wall of a single detached, semi-detached, or street townhouse dwelling shall have a minimum distance of 1.2 meters to an interior side lot line. Any steps or landings for such a door shall have a minimum distance of the lesser of A, 0.9 meters to interior side lot line, or B, the required interior side yard setback. Next slide, please. So the wording of this existing above grade side entrance provision permits an above grade door in a 0.6 meter side yard where the door is recessed 1.2 meters from the interior side lot line. So this scenario does not meet the requirements of the Ontario Building Code or the zoning bylaw for use as a primary entrance for a 2-unit dwelling. And this may be causing some confusion and frustration amongst new homeowners who are purchasing homes with a recessed above grade door in a side yard that has a minimum width of 0.6 meters, specifically if they want to pursue the registration of a second unit using the recessed above grade side door as the primary entrance. The existing wording of the above grade side entrance provision also doesn't provide enough adequate space to access a side door without the potential of trespassing on the neighboring property. Next slide, please. Let's propose that an amendment to the above grade side door entrance provision be proposed to ensure that any new above grade door in the side yard is only permitted where there is a minimum 1.2 meter interior side yard width, which is essentially the building setback, up to and including the door, regardless of whether it is used as a secondary means of access for the principal dwelling or used as a primary entrance to a 2-unit dwelling. I just wanted to highlight that there are still currently the 2-unit dwelling zoning bylaw provisions in the bylaw that require that where access to a second unit is provided through a door located in the side yard or rear yard, permitted encroachments, structures, utilities, or mechanical equipment shall not be permitted within 1.2 meters of the side lot line for the portion of the side yard between the primary access door and the front wall of the dwelling. This amendment being presented tonight does not propose any changes to the 2-unit dwelling zoning bylaw requirements. If the above grade side door is only being used as a secondary means of access to the dwelling, the 1.2 meter side yard may still be encumbered by things such as an air conditioning unit. So specifically on this screen is the proposed amendment that we're proposing to replace the existing above grade side entrance provisions within the zoning bylaw. And just quickly to read through this, an at or above grade door located on a side wall of a single detached, semi-detached, or townhouse dwelling shall only be permitted when 1, the side yard within which the door is located has a minimum width of 1.2 meters extending from the front wall of the dwelling up to and including the door, or the side yard within which the door is located has a minimum width of 1.2 meters extending from the rear wall of the dwelling up to including the door, provided that a continuous side yard width of not less than 1.2 meters is provided on the opposite side of the dwelling. And any steps or landings for such side entrance shall have a minimum setback of 0.9 meters to interior side lot line or the required interior side yard setback, whichever is less. Notwithstanding that previous provision, a landing that is less than 0.6 meters above ground level, having a maximum length and width of 0.9 meters, shall be permitted, provided that steps are provided on both the front and rear of the landing to provide pedestrian access from the front yard to the rear yard. Next slide, please. All feedback received from the public will be assessed following this public meeting, and I will prepare a final recommendation report and official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for council's consideration that will address conformity with provincial policies and address any comments received from members of the public. I will contact and follow up with those residents who have spoken, written in, or advised of an interest in these city-initiated amendments. Next slide, please. The report associated with tonight's meeting is available online. Presentation will be available online shortly. My name and my contact information is posted on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Now, are there any delegations, City Clerk?
Mr. Chair, yes, we do have one from Jotvinder Sodhi. And Jotvinder, you are in the session, so you can proceed with your delegation. You can unmute your mic. You can proceed, Jotvinder.
Yes, please. And thank you, the City Clerk and council members and the chair and the staff for bringing up somewhat clarity on some gray area where builders, developers use the tools around it because they have planners and they have all the tools. When homeowners purchase a house, they struggle with the city to have second dwelling unit legally approved, which help the city. If it says provincial mandate is very clear to give affordable housing, same time it has to be safe and legal, so which help the city to have more revenue based on the finished area. But these all laws will be helpful if the planning approve the right properties. Like when they approve the subdivision, they look at the perspective of hey, they are using, like, say, front here, then 2 feet inside, then 2 feet outside, or there is a air conditioning unit, or there are side entrances. I have seen personally, we have showed to the previous council members that even a dog can walk through in the area, and there is a side entrance. So need to be addressed properly with the planning too. It's a one piece. The second piece has to be planning. When they approve the subdivision, they need to look at those perspectives, as well as driveway too. We have floated end of the last year. We have floated so many videos, so many pictures on the social media. Mayor and the other council members, including many of you, have seen it. There was a talk of the town that developers have been given freeway or leverage to do the way they would like to develop, and that end up having a 1.5 driveway or one driveway on a double garage. So walkway in the middle was another concern. We have raised this flag in 2016 and to the planning board, which has been neglected that time. We are looking forward that some of the council members were part of that meeting. And I think Mr. Dillon has said publicly on a debates happening. I think he can comment on those points. We need those loopholes to be closed for the developers, so that way end user, the homeowner, don't suffer or struggle with the city to have a legal, safe accommodation as per provincial mandate to provide affordable housing to the new Canadians or whoever wish to take that. The last part, I have a humble request to the council member and staff to have input from the lobby groups, which have been actively lobbying for years and years. It never happens. The policies are made by the staff and council approves. That's it. And this is an opportunity. We could provide more pictures. We can provide more evidences to the staff, but it has to be considered when you're making a policy. This is our city, and we do care about our city. Thank you very much, Chair and the member of the council, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sodi. Do any members of committee have any questions for the delegation? I see none, so thank you very much, Mr. Sodi. Do any members of committee have questions for staff?
For staff, yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councilor Fortini, go ahead.
Yeah, just for clarification, if you go back on the slide, it says that the yes side entrance, we have to, someone has their mic on. We have to leave a 1.2 meter on the opposite side of the home. So is that what we're going to be asking developers to build now, to do that? Because I've never seen 1.2 meters, 4 feet on the opposite side of the home.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Elizabeth Corzola. Just to clarify, the requirement for the 1.2 meter side yard width is a requirement on either side of the dwelling. So there are instances where they will have the 1.2 meter width leading from the sidewall of the dwelling to the door in the sidewall. However, there are other times when the door is sort of in a nook that's behind a garage, if you will, and they have the 1.2 meters on the opposite side of the dwelling, and then it goes across the backyard and down the rear wall of the dwelling. That's in a lot of the older homes and older subdivisions. It's very unusual to see that kind of configuration in newer subdivisions where the lot lines are maxed out as the builders build, the best product they can that will fit on the lot, but to allow the opportunity for homeowners of existing units to make use of a 1.2 meter path of travel on the other side of the dwelling, if it leads straight down that side across the backyard and into a side door that still meets that 1.2 meter setback, that provides the maximum flexibility. It is not a requirement for new builders to build 1.2 meters on both sides of the house.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see no further questions or comments. So I do have a motion moved by Councilor Fortini to approve the staff report recommendations and receive the delegations. That the report titled Information Report City Initiated Amendments to Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th be received. That Planning, Building, and Economic Development Department staff be directed to report back to Planning and Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and final recommendations. Are there any objections to this? So vote in. Is anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote.
Mr. Chair, it's also to receive the delegation. Sorry.
And also to receive the delegation. My apologies. Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you very much. This item is adjourned. We go now to item 5.3, application to amend the zoning bylaw to permit 29 additional units, relocate the supermarket, update setback requirements, and remove the holding provision in Ward 8. And I will hand this over to Stephen Dykstra. Welcome, Stephen.
Welcome. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee and the public. My name is Stephen Dykstra, and I'm the development planner who's been assigned to process and review this application to amend the zoning bylaw. The purpose of this public meeting is to, of course, provide information to the public, seek feedback on the application. And as always, no decisions will be made at this meeting. It's for information purposes only. Next slide. The subject property is located on the north side of Queen Street East. It is east of McVean, south of Ebenezer, and west of Cherry Crest. The site is currently vacant. Next slide. From this aerial photograph, you can see that the surrounding land uses include single detached residential dwellings and a parking lot to the north, vacant lands to the west, commercial lands to the east, and conservation lands to the south. Next slide. This slide depicts what the proposed development is for. It was approved actually on June 8th, 2018. It permits the following: 6 residential towers, 2 commercial buildings, a hotel, an office tower, essential amenity area, and it has underground parking for all of this. Since that time, though, the applicant decided to move the supermarket from the building at the southeast corner, which is Building J, to the standalone building on Cherry Crest, which is Building G. In moving that supermarket, this created some additional area within Building J, so additional residential units were then included within that building. There were also some changes to the right-of-way for Queen Street, so the applicant is requiring some changes to those setbacks. And finally, in order for the development to advance, there's a holding provision which is required to be lifted prior to the development being permitted. Next slide. This highlights what I just stated. It's relocating the supermarket from Building J to Building G, providing an additional 29 apartment units, lifting the holding provision, which are servicing requirements, and various setback adjustments to Queen Street East and Cherry Crest Drive. Next slide. The public notice was sent out to 240-meter radius to the proposed development. They will receive direct mail with respect to this application. Notice was also provided in the Brampton Guardian and is on the City of Brampton website. Next slide. Process to date. To date, this application has been received by the city and staff and has been circulated the materials and found them to be substantially complete. The application is in the process of being reviewed. The notice has also been circulated, and now we're at the public meeting. Next slide. The current planning status. According to our review, amendments are not required for the PPS, the region official plan, the city official plan, the secondary plan. However, an amendment is required for the zoning bylaw. Next slide. The planning framework summary. So the application is evaluated on a number of documents, including the Planning Act, the PPS, the Greater Golden Horseshoe, Region of Peel, and the City of Brampton official plan. Next slide. In reviewing this, we looked at the official plan, and it designates this area as Business Corridor and Special Land Use Policy Area 14. We found that it did not require an amendment to this. Next slide. Again, we looked at this from a secondary plan perspective. It's identified as Office Node and Special Policy Area 17. Again, it did not require an amendment. Next slide. Here you can see all the zones that were created in 2018. There's a number of them there. So there were some requirements necessary to make the zoning available so that it could accommodate what the applicant is requiring, including the relocation of the supermarket, increasing the number of units by 29, lifting of the holding provision, and a variety of setback adjustments. I've detailed on the next slide exactly how these are sort of viewable in a better way. Next slide. These are the actual details of the zoning bylaw amendment. Again, relocating the supermarket from Building J to Building G, increasing the number of apartment units by 29, which actually increases the total residential unit count from 753 to 782. Lifting of the holding provision for zone, the office commercial section 2889. For section 2886, we're increasing the setbacks. For section 2888, we're also increasing the setbacks to Cherry Crest Drive. Section 2891, it's both decreasing in certain areas and increasing certain areas of the setbacks to Queen Street. And finally, in section 2892, it's increasing setbacks to Queen Street and decreasing setbacks to Cherry Crest Drive. Next slide, sorry. We're also reviewing a master site plan as well as a phase 1 site plan for this area. And the region of Peel is reviewing if there's sufficient information and capacity for the lifting of the holding provision. Finally, staff will continue with the review of all of the submitted documentation. Next slide. Next steps, we're at the public meeting today. Further, we will be collecting and reviewing any comments that received from the public and other comments, and there'll be a recommendation report, and if necessary, an appeal period if it comes to that. Finally, last slide. The report and presentation will be found on the website. I'm the city planner. There's my contact information, Stephen Dykstra, and the applicant is KLM, and you can contact Grant at KLM. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. City Clerk, do we have any delegations?
Mr. Chair, the applicant, Billy Tung from KLM Planners, is present and has a presentation should the committee wish to receive it. Billy, you are in the session. I don't know if you wish to confirm if you wish to proceed with your presentation or not.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Billy Tung with KLM Planning Partners. We are the planning agent for the owner. I have a quick, very brief presentation that I believe most of the materials have already been covered very succinctly by Stephen, but I am available to answer any particular questions there may be about the proposed amendment. But if you wish, I can quickly run through my presentation.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, if we can proceed through the next slide. Next slide. We don't have to talk about the location or the generalities of where it is located, since Stephen's done a very good job going through it. The background Stephen's already touched on, the fact that the site-specific amendments were passed in 2018, and we're really here before committee with a proposed zoning bylaw amendment to really rectify a number of minor setback and matters and development standard matters. Part of these amendments are driven by additional road widenings for intersection tapering and improvements along Queen Street, which because of the irregular shape of the site generated some ripple effects throughout the internal site layout. If we can advance to the next slide, I can quickly illustrate the point. Sorry, the next one. Here we have the previous site plan. As you can see, the layout of the previous site plan is in arrangement with the 6 residential buildings, the office and hotel buildings right at McVean, and single-story retail buildings, standalone retail buildings along Cherry Crest and facing onto the internal park. Next slide. That is this illustrates the current proposal. Again, it on the surface of it, it is there's absolutely no difference in the overall layout of the site and programming of the site. What has changed is because of the additional land takings along the regional road on Queen Street, it necessitated some redesign and shifting of the 3 buildings along Queen Street, which necessitate the setback amendment that we are seeking today. In addition to that, Building J, which is the corner building right at Queen Street and Cherry Crest, that used to house the supermarket retail unit on the ground floor. But however, with the reduction in the right-of-way width and the shifting of the building floor plate, it became apparent that the programming called for the retail component to be shifted out of that mixed-use building and put into a standalone retail building along Cherry Crest, and that's the building G that is along Cherry Crest, just north of that building. The purple highlighted area illustrates really the phase 1 of the development, which we have site plan applications for with staff, and they are reviewing it. So Just to summarize the amendments that are before you, the development or the configuration and programming of the development largely stays intact. We view these amendments to be technical in nature to accommodate the road widening and the ripple effects it had with the internal layout of the rest of the site. The shifting of the supermarket use from the base of the mixed-use building to a standalone building is still in keeping with the spirit and intention of the zoning bylaw, and that the supermarket will still be delivered in the phase one of the development, albeit in a standalone building instead of at the base of the building. And we believe that the improvements to the mixed-use building, building J at the corner there, with the additional lobby entrance that directly address the prominent intersection, and other changes to the base of the building provides for an improvement to the overall design scheme. And
Billy, you have 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. And the additional 29 units, again, it's a matter of the additional residential uses along the base, as well as some smaller units in the building unit mix itself. So again, the GFA has not increased in the overall development, and it's still largely the same development that council approved back in 2018. Thank you, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Do members of the committee have any questions or comments? Again, I remind you to identify your interest in the chat box. As I see nothing right now, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Williams to approve the staff report recommendations applicant delegation, that the report titled Information Report Application to amend the zoning bylaw, KLM Planning Partners, northeast corner of Queen Street East and McVean Drive, Ward 8, to the Planning Development Service Committee meeting of January 18th, 2021 be received. The Planning Development Services staff be directed to report back to the Planning Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and the staff recommendations subsequent to the completion and circulation of the application and a comprehensive evaluation of the proposal and delegations. The delegations included by Mr. Billy Tung of KLML Planning Partners and Paul.
Mr. Chair, Paul Mann did not appear. He is a project representative, and we do have the correspondence which is set out in recommendation 4, which is 11.2 on the agenda.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative, and I see no objections. So this item is now adjourned. Thank you. We go on now to staff report 5.4, application to amend the official plan zoning bylaw to permit 24 stacked back-to-back townhouses on Sunfield Investments Church Incorporated. And this is in Ward 1. And I believe we have Yin Chow, who will provide us with a presentation. Welcome, Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the committee and the public. My name is Yin Xiao, and I'm the planner assigned to process and review this application to amend the official plan and the zoning bylaw. The purpose of the public meeting is to provide information to the public and give feedback on this application. Next slide, please.
Yin, it's Peter. I wonder if you can speak a little closer to the microphone. It is a little low.
Okay, I will try to speak louder.
Thank you. That's better.
Okay, thank you. So the subject lands are located on the north side of Church Street East and to the west of Kennedy Road North. The property is listed on the city's municipal register of cultural heritage resources. The building on site was lost to fire on October 31st, 2019. Next slide, please. The site is a budding low-density residential development and is adjacent to a daycare to the north. So there are several mid-rise rental apartments in the vicinity. Next slide, please. The proposed development is intended to have a condominium tenure, which consists of 24 stacked back-to-back townhouse and 3 traditional townhouse units, with a density of 91 units per hectare. A total of 38 parking spaces at grade and underground are proposed, including 8 visitor parking spaces. There is 1 access on Church Street East. This slide shows the proposed elevations of the stacked back-to-back townhouses, which are 3 stories in height with end units having 2 stories. Next slide, please. The slide shows the proposed elevations of the traditional townhouse block, which have a height of 3 stories. Next, please. A tertiary plan has been prepared which incorporates the neighboring properties, that is 176 and 178 Church Street East. The tertiary plan is proposing apartment building and townhouse developments on those properties with shared driveways. Staff will evaluate the plan in terms of the development pattern, access, compatibility, and urban design. Next, please. The application will be evaluated against existing provincial and municipal policies, including the following. Next, please. The official plan designation of the property is residential, which permits a broad range of residential uses. An official plan amendment is required to permit the proposed density. Next, please. The Brampton Flowertown Secondary Plan designates the property low-density residential, which only allows for single detached dwellings with a maximum density of 30 units per hectare. The applicant is proposing to redesignate the subject property to high-density residential. Next, please. The property is zoned residential single detached B by the current zoning bylaw. The applicant is proposing to rezone the property to a residential townhouse zone. Next slide. The application is currently under review and several technical considerations have been identified. Heritage status. So the property is listed on the city's municipal register of cultural heritage resources and was last to fire in October 2019. The applicant submitted a heritage impact study, which will be presented to the Brampton Heritage Board and the council to determine if the property should be removed from the municipal register or it should be designated. Transition to low-density development. The site is adjacent to low-density residential developments consisting of single detached houses. Staff's review will consider the proposed building height, massing, setbacks, landscape buffer, and any impact on the privacy relative to the scale and character of the existing residential area. Shared trees. According to the arborist report, 17 trees that are proposed to be removed are located on the shared property lines or on the adjacent lands. Written consent from the neighboring property owners are required prior to the city's consideration to approve the injury or the removal of those trees. Next slide, please. So the application was deemed complete on November 18th, 2020. Sorry for the incorrect dates on the slide. And the notice of public meeting was circulated to the property owners within 240 meters of the subject land on December 11th, 2020. Staff will continue the review of the application, including reviewing the comments from the public. And staff will, at a later date, advance a final recommendation report to council for a decision. Issues that have been raised will be addressed in the recommendation report. Next, please. The report and submitted materials associated with tonight's meeting is available online and the presentation will be available online shortly. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, my manager, or the applicant. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To the City Clerk, do we have any delegations?
Mr. Chair, we do. We have the applicant, Jessica Demarin from Weston Consulting is present and has a presentation for committee. And we also have correspondence 11.1. Okay. Jessica, you're in the session. You can unmute your mic and we'll have your presentation up momentarily.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jessica Dameron. I'm a planner at Weston Consulting. We are the retained planning consultant representing the landowner with respect to this application. Acknowledging receipt of some public comments, we have a very brief presentation prepared just to provide some additional clarification tonight. Maybe you can proceed to the next slide. So we have submitted a full package of technical studies and materials supporting the proposed application, including those listed on this slide. This documentation is available through the link below. We've also received technical comments from the city and agency staff, and we are working through these comments and will consider adjustments to the proposal where appropriate. Next slide. Just to provide some additional site context, the subject property abuts the northern boundary of Brampton's central area and is located within 500 meters of the urban growth center. There are significant transit improvements within the surrounding area, including new rapid transit upgrades along Queen Street. And as a result, the Kennedy Road BRT stop is being considered as a potential protected major transit station area, which is located within walking distance of the subject property. As you can see in this figure, the subject property is located within the delineated MTSA boundary as preliminarily proposed by the region. There's existing high density residential uses to the south and the east of the site. And given its locational context, the proposed density of this proposal is appropriate for the site as a form of gentle residential infill. The townhouse built form will also provide a transition from the higher density residential to the low density residential located to the north and the west. The intent of this proposal is to diversify the range of housing options in a transit supportive built form that supports a complete community. Next slide, please. At this time, the development is proposed to be developed through a standard condominium. Block 1, which contains the stacked units, will be comprised of 1- and 2-story units with independent access from grade. And the units range in size from approximately 700 square feet to just under 1,000 square feet. Block 2, which contains the traditional units, will contain 3-story units with integral garages, and these units will range in size from approximately 1,300 square feet to 1,400 square feet. We have proposed slightly narrower unit widths in these blocks. However, we have achieved a functional floor plan, and we believe that this appropriately reflects the context of the site and the narrow nature of the property. We acknowledge that there have been concerns regarding accessibility. This will be further addressed through the site plan application process, but ultimately the development will be designed in accordance with OBC and fire code requirements. Next slide, please. With respect to parking, we are seeking a slight reduction in the number of required spaces. A traffic impact study and a parking study have been submitted. The traffic impact study has been accepted by city staff, and there are no traffic impacts anticipated as a result of the proposal. We have 38 parking spaces, 6 at grade, 26 underground, and 6 in private garages. As we've heard in the first presentation of tonight's meeting, many parking rates across the city are outdated, and we believe, given the locational context of this site, that a reduced parking requirement is appropriate for this development. Next slide, please.
30 seconds, Jessica.
Okay, here's a quick outline of the landscape plan. We've got 2 central amenity areas, one along the rear and one central to the site, as well as private amenity provided through rear yards, decks, at-grade terraces, and above-grade balconies. Next slide, please. We also have maintained setbacks with walkways, deciduous trees, and privacy fencing along the boundaries of the site. And we are replacing 38 trees, with the remainder being provided through cash in lieu to try and protect the tree canopy in this area. Next slide. So this just gives you a quick look at the elevations. The maximum height of the building are 11.5 meters, or 3 stories in height. And as you can see in block 1, the ends taper down to 2 stories to ensure a transition to the low density residential. Next slide. These are the elevations which you've already seen of the traditional towns, which are 3 stories in height. Next slide. So as mentioned, we continue to work through technical comments, and further details will be provided through a future site plan application. I would be happy to answer any questions regarding the proposal.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments? I see none, so I do have a motion here moved by Councillor Santos to approve the staff report recommendations and applicant delegation, that the report titled Information Report Applicant to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw, Sunfield Investments, Weston Consulting 172 Church Street East, to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th, 2021, that Development Services staff be directed to report back to the Planning Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and staff recommendations subsequent to the completion of the circulation of the application and comprehensive evaluation of the proposal, and also correspondence as noted, I think 11.2, City Clerk, is that correct?
11.1, Mr. Chair, I believe.
11.1, my apologies. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. Okay, there are no objections, so the motion carries. We now move on to item 5.5, application to amend the zoning bylaw, 21-story residential building with 290 units, KLM Ward 4. I will ask now Himanshu Katyal, our development planner for planning, building and economic development. Welcome, Himanshu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the committee and the public. My name is Himanshu Katyal, and I'm the planner assigned to process and review this application to amend the zoning bylaw. Please note that the committee will not make a decision today. The purpose of this meeting is to provide information to the public and seek feedback on the application. Next slide. The subject lands are located at 225 Malta Avenue, and the nearest major intersection is Malta Avenue and Steeles. Next slide. Surrounding land uses include future phase 3 of this development to the north, beyond which is Steeles Avenue West and existing residential uses. To the south and west is Malta Avenue, beyond which are residential uses. To the east are vacant lands, which are designated for mixed uses. Next slide. The application proposes a zoning bylaw amendment to permit a 21-story residential apartment building with 290 units on Block 2, which is highlighted in red, and to remove the holding symbol for both Block 2 and 3 as shown on the plan in front of you. The proposal will also provide 298 parking spaces within 3 levels of underground parking, which will be accessed from Malta Avenue. Next slide. The official plan designation of the property is residential, This designation permits a broad range of residential uses that range from single detached to apartment units. An official plan amendment is not required. Next slide. The Hurontario Main Corridor Secondary Plan designates the property as Mixed Use 1. This designation represents an area that will have the highest densities in order to support the Gateway Mobility Hub at Steeles Avenue and Hurontario Street. A full range of office, commercial, institutional, cultural, and entertainment uses, as well as medium and high density residential dwellings, live-work units, related community facilities, and infrastructure are permitted within this designation. A secondary plan amendment is not required. The subject property is zoned residential apartment holding zone with a special section. This zone permits a range of residential and commercial uses. This zone also limits the maximum number of residential units to 269 and a maximum building height to 12 stories. Further, there is a holding symbol on the property that shall not be removed until such time as an adequate vehicular access can be provided to service development north of Malta Avenue. The adequate access in this respect may be comprised of the completion of Malta Avenue, the connection of Malta Avenue to Lancashire Lane, and access to Steeles Avenue, a combination thereof, or other comparable access arrangements to the satisfaction of the city. Until such time as the holding symbol is removed, development in this zone shall be limited to a maximum of 80 residential units and shall not occupy any portion of the property within 35 meters of Steeles Avenue frontage. Next slide. Due to the current requirements, the application proposes to amend the zoning bylaw, which will propose site-specific provisions to permit the residential development on Block 2, as well as remove the holding symbol for both Block 2 and Block 3. At this time, staff has noted these issues that will need to be addressed. Confirmation that the proposed access will adequately accommodate the traffic that will be generated by the Phase 2 and future Phase 3 developments. Whether this proposal will provide adequate amenity area to serve the needs of future residents, whether there will be no negative shadowing impacts to the existing uses to the west and south, as well as confirmation will be required that the site design for this phase will integrate or share the common amenity areas with the future Phase 3. Next slide. Prior to finalizing recommendations to council, this application will be further evaluated for consistency with the Planning Act, provincial policy statement, conformity with the growth plan, the Region of Peel official plan, as well as the City of Brampton official plan. Next slide. Staff will continue the review of the application, including reviewing comments from the public. Staff will at a later date advance a final recommendation report to council for a decision. Issues that have been raised will be addressed in the recommendation report. Staff will contact and follow up with those residents who have provided comments through all channels. Next slide. The report and submitted materials associated with tonight's meeting are available online. The presentation will also be available online shortly. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, my manager, or the applicant. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. City Clerk, do we have any delegations?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have the applicant's representatives, Ryan Mino-Lehan from KLM Planning and Joseph Hong from I2 Developments. They have a brief presentation to provide to the committee, and then we have correspondence item 11.4. So Ryan and Joseph, you're in the session now. You can unmute your microphone to address the committee.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So good evening, Mr. Chair, members of committee, staff, and members of the public here tonight. As the clerk had mentioned, my name is Ryan Mino-Lehan. I'm a land use planner and partner with KLM Planning Partners, the agent on behalf of I2 Developments Brampton, Inc. I do have a presentation, but much of it was actually covered by Himanshu. So I'm not going to bother with the location, the existing zoning or official plan. I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the site plan, the site layout, and just the general context in terms of the growth in the corridor. So if we could just go to the site plan slide. Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. As we'd mentioned, the application is a rezoning application to facilitate a 21-story residential apartment building. And it will accommodate 290 residential units with 298 underground parking spaces with an average FSI of 4.25. The purpose for the rezoning really is to implement the official plan and the secondary plan, which is, as Himanshu had mentioned, intended to accommodate a significant amount of growth and intensification in the overall secondary plan area. In terms of the site plan, so phase 2 is on the north side of Malta Avenue. This is the second of a three-phased plan. The first phase being on the south side of Malta Avenue, consisting of 109 back-to-back townhouses, which are mostly occupied today. And then phase 3 is located immediately to the north, adjacent to the south side of Steeles Avenue West, which will be subject to a future application before this committee at a later date. So the phase 2 lands are serviced through Malta Avenue, and the phase 2 and phase 3 lands were provided shared access from the southeast corner of the subject lands. And as you can see on the site plan, the overall building fronts Malta Avenue, which provides that active frontage and pedestrian element that's been encouraged by the urban design principles within the city of Brampton. As well, you'll note that there's a small connection up to Steeles Avenue West, and what this provides is for an emergency access, which is intended to address some of the comments that have been received through the planning department and transportation staff over the past number of years as we've been working through this multi-phase approval. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this just summarizes the existing zoning, which currently only permits a 12-story residential building with a maximum FSI of 3 and a maximum number of 269 units. So the amendment before you this evening is to increase the height from 12 to 21 stories, increase the FSI, and permit 290 residential units, as I'd mentioned. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm just going to go through the last few slides here. We'll just provide some overall renderings of what the overall subject lands are going to look like. So in this slide, you can see the access that's provided on the east side of the property with a landscape feature situated in the middle of the property. And we're currently working on revised design, which is really interesting. And it's been based on some great discussion with staff at the city of Brampton in terms of creating a more urban center amenity space in there to be utilized by both phase 2 and phase 3. And as you can see, it shows some of the interior amenity spaces as part of the phase 2 and the future phase 3 lands, which will be connected together in the middle there. Next slide, please. These are just some renderings of what the proposal is going to look like from afar, so from the west, and a close-up of what the rendering will look like from the south side of Malta Avenue, which shows the layering and the differentiality of the materials that are being used in the overall design. The last thing I wanted to comment on is I think it's really important to acknowledge that the subject lands are located within the city of Brampton's uptown vision area. And my client and myself and our team, we've been actively involved in discussions with Ken Greenberg and other members of that task force with implementing the vision. And the proposed development, in our opinion, supports this vision through intensification that is intended to support a 20-minute walkable community and supports the investment at the Gateway Mobility Hub and of the Hurontario LRT. The last thing I wanted to indicate is that we acknowledge the comments from the members of the public regarding this application with respect to traffic. While I acknowledge that we have submitted a transportation impact study in support of the proposed application, we will work with staff to ensure that these comments are addressed appropriately through the process. With that, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do have Councillor Willens. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Quick presentation. It's nice to always have a quick one. I know if it's possible, I'm wondering if we can maybe, as this moves forward, maybe we have a conversation about the tying into either Sheridan's district energy or tying into Sheridan or RioCan's, because I know RioCan is looking at doing some kind of district energy at their place as well. I wonder if maybe we can start that conversation earlier than later.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that comment. It's nothing that I can recall that we've seen come through the comments. The application was filed relatively recently. We are working with staff to respond to those comments, and so this is something that we will bring to their attention. We can have a discussion about that as we move through the process. So I appreciate the input.
Great, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Willens. As I see there's no further questions or comments, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Bowman that the report titled Information Report Application to the Amended Zoning Bylaw 225 Malta Avenue Ward 4 to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th be received, that Planning Development Services staff be directed to report back to the Planning Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and a staff recommendation subsequent to the completion of the circulation of the application and comprehensive evaluation of the proposal, and that the delegation be received. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Okay, so there are no objections, so the motion carries. Our next presentation, our next report, item 5.6, application to amend the zoning bylaw, TAC Holborn Corporation, Malone Given Parsons Limited, Ward 8, and I will hand this over now to Mark Michniak, our development planner for Planning, Building, and Economic Development. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, and good evening, Chair, committee members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Mark Michniak, and I'm the planner assigned to process and review the subject application. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide information to the public and seek feedback on the application filed by Malone Given Parsons on behalf of TAC Holborn Corporation. Next slide. Subject property is located within Ward 8 in the eastern part of Brampton. It is located on the east side of the Gore Road between Queen Street East and Fogle Road. Next slide. The applicant is proposing a mixed-use, high-density residential development. The applicant proposes the creation of 664 apartment dwelling units with retail space on the ground floor. The zoning bylaw amendment will permit the proposed height. Next slide. The applicant is proposing 2 towers joined by a connecting podium. Tower A to the north is 25 stories, and Tower B to the south is 30 stories. The connecting podium is 10 stories with a step back at the 4th story. Next slide, please. There will be 1,281 square meters of retail space on the ground floor, fronting onto the Gore Road, and 2,259 square meters of amenity space provided throughout the building. Next slide. Parking will be within 2 levels of underground parking garage and ground level parking on the east side of the building. Primary access is from Skybridge Drive, and the secondary access to Roxburgh Court will be available in the future. Next slide, please. This map shows properties within 240 meters of the proposed development. Owners of these properties would have received notice by direct mail with respect to the proposal. Notice was also provided in the Brampton Guardian newspaper and on the City of Brampton website. Next slide. Surrounding land uses include, to the north, currently vacant but undergoing development as residential neighborhood consisting of single detached dwellings and townhouse dwellings. To the east, open space designated as neighborhood park and a stormwater management facility. To the south, vacant lands designated for employment uses. And to the west, there is a commercial plaza and convention center located on the west side of the Gore Road. Next slide. The subject property is designated residential in the official plan. An amendment to the official plan is not required. Next slide. Property is designated mixed commercial/industrial in Special Policy Area 8, Office Node, mixed commercial/industrial, in the Bram East secondary plan. An amendment to the secondary plan is required to permit the proposed height and density. This amendment is being processed under a separate file number C10E04.005. Next slide, please. Subject property is currently zoned residential high density zone in the zoning bylaw. This zone only permits buildings up to a maximum of 10 stories. An amendment to the zoning bylaw will be required in order to permit the proposed height. Next slide. There are a few items that staff are monitoring on this file. We are considering the impact of additional height and density on the surrounding neighborhood, including traffic and services. We are reviewing pedestrian connections throughout the site and linkages and interface with the adjacent neighborhood park to the east. We're also examining the effects of grade change on retail units facing onto the Gore Road. Next slide, please. Prior to finalizing recommendations to Council, this application will be further evaluated for consistency with the Planning Act, provincial policy statement, and conformity with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the Region of Peel official plan, and the City of Brampton official plan. Next slide, please. This slide shows where staff are in the review of the application. The application has been circulated to city departments as well as other agencies for technical comment. Notice of the public meeting was given to property owners in the vicinity of the property and published in the newspaper and on the city's website. We are now at the public meeting stage. Committee members and staff are here to listen to any feedback. After tonight's public meeting, comments received from city departments, agencies, members of the public, and matters raised tonight through public delegations will be reviewed and evaluated. The proposal will be further assessed against provincial policy statement, growth plan, regional official plan, and the city's official plan and secondary plan. Once the analysis and evaluation is complete, staff will return to the Planning and Development Committee with a recommendation report. The recommendation report will address all matters raised by members of the public, external agencies, and other city departments. Anyone that provided their contact information with respect to this application will be advised when the recommendation report will be considered by committee. Once City Council makes a decision, there is an opportunity to appeal the decision to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. Next slide, please. The report associated with tonight's meeting is available online, and the presentation will be available online shortly. Again, my name is Mark Mishniak, and my contact information is posted on screen. Also on screen is the contact information for the applicant, Lauren Capilongo of Malone Given Parsons. Thank you, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. And to the city clerk, I believe we have a delegation from the applicant.
Yes, Lauren Capilongo from Malone Given Parsons is present to address the committee. After that, we have Sylvia Roberts, who has requested to delegate on this item as well, along with correspondence 11.3 on tonight's agenda. So Lauren, if you wish to address the committee, please go ahead.
Good evening, members of committee. My name is Lauren Capilongo, and I'm a land use planner and principal with the firm Malone Given Parsons. And I'm here tonight on behalf of TAC Holborn. I don't really have too much to add to Mark's presentation. He was quite thorough in terms of outlining the proposed development for this site. What I did want to highlight for staff, for committee this evening is this property has a long history dating back, I think, to probably 2014, 2015, with the application for a draft plan subdivision that was recently approved, I think, a couple of years ago. And as part of that application process, we created this high density block. And the basis really is to provide additional intensification adjacent to Queen Street, which everyone knows is a intensification corridor, and with the planned BRT station right at the corner of Gore Road and Queen Street, it seemed a logical location to place some additional density. So that's sort of the basis and history of how this block came to be. So with that, I'll leave it there for now. Like I said, Mark's presentation was quite thorough, and I'm available to answer any particular questions that council may have on this matter.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I believe we do have a delegation from Sylvia Roberts. Sylvia?
Hello. I don't have any slides for this one. So for this, the provincial plan does not, the regional official plan does not designate this as an ETSA, but given how close it is, and they're currently reviewing it based on the preliminary documents, it looks like it would be ranked within the distance of an MTSA, so it should probably be considered like that. So we don't have the situation where it gets through, gets approved, and then approved for an MTSA, and then the applicant comes back and there's more haggling about it, just getting it done once would be nice. The other thing to consider about this site is this is the Highway 50 bus, the Gore Road. Umbra College is going to soon, I believe 2023 is when Toronto plans to open Line 6 Finch. So this, in addition to being on the Queen Street BRT, it's going to have a one bus connection to the subway system via the Gore Road. This would be a good place to have less parking and more transit. I know this is in Ward 8, but this is also beneficial to Ward 10, because if the people at this development are using the Gore Road bus, it justifies better bus service for the Gore Road and will benefit people for just north of Ebenezer, all the way to Castlemore. This is a large development, and so when looking at the financial considerations, it talks about just the permit fees, but at over 600 units, this is going to have a significant impact both on revenue and cost. I'm a bit curious why the city doesn't consider both the revenue and the cost associated with the development, because it's additional tax revenue, but it's also additional services to provide. This is like saying, well, it's free to go to the store to look at a phone to buy for my kid. Like, and yeah, the development charges will pay for the phone, but what about the cost after that? You get to pay for. You get to pay for it once it's built. There's services that have to be provided, and is the revenue going to cover that? So, I would like to see this project and just larger projects in general some kind of financial consideration. The Planning Act says that the planning department should, so I'm just not sure. Has the planning department not been told to do that, or do they not have the resources in order to be able to do what is effectively their job as outlined in the Planning Act? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I do see Councillor Bowman. He has a question. Go ahead, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Chair Medeiros. Just a question of clarification for either Lauren or Mark. Are these condominiums or are these rental apartments?
Through you, Mr. Chair, these are proposed as condominium units.
Condominium units. Okay, so in this situation, would the city have any requirement for affordable units at all in these buildings?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this is Alan Parsons speaking. Councillor Bowman, we are looking at that matter now. We're receiving comments from various staff and commenting agencies, including our policy division. And that's a matter that we'll be discussing and contemplating more so. We'll be reporting back on really that aspect within a future recommendation report, and we'll be speaking with the area councillors about that matter just as we're continuing on with the review.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowman. As I see no further questions or comments, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Fortini. Is that the proper area councillor? And yes, it is. And so the motion reads that the report titled OZS 2020-0032-886 Gore Road to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th be received, that Planning Development Services staff be directed to report back to the Planning Development Committee with the results of the public meeting and a staff recommendation subsequent to the completion of the circulation of the application, a comprehensive evaluation of the proposal, and received delegations by the applicant representative and also by Sylvia Roberts. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. There are no objections, so the motion carries. Statutory public meeting for this item is now adjourned. We go now on to public delegations. And City Clerk, are there any delegations regarding site-specific amendment to the sign bylaw, Peel Standard Condominium Corporation on Torbram Road, Ward 7?
Mr. Chair, we have received no delegation requests.
Okay, thank you very much. So we do have a related staff report, item 7.1, which we can consider after staff presentation, or would I'm at the will of committee. Do you want to consider the report now? Okay, no. So we'll move on to the next item and deal with staff report item in agenda order. Item 6.1, delegation regarding application to amend the zoning bylaw. Okay, we did that. We go on now to 6.3. 6.3 was dealt with. Is that correct, Peter?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no. 6.3 is a delegation from Colin Chung, Glenn Schnarr Associates. He's present for this item, and it relates to item 7.5 on tonight's agenda.
Sounds good. So we'll go to delegation Colin Chung. Welcome.
You can proceed, Colin. Just unmute your microphone.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee. For the record, my name is Colin Chung of Glenn Schnarr Associates. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to delegate in front of you tonight. I'm here on behalf of Medallion Developments, Inc., who is the owner of the property known as 69 Bramley Road. This property, Mr. Chairman, is within walking distance to the existing Bramley GO station. Just as a little bit of background, Mr. Chairman, back in 2017, City Council approved Official Plan Amendment 133 pertaining to this such a property that provided permission for high-density residential and retail. That OPA 133, along with other OPAs dealing with employment land conversion, were appealed to LPAT by a third-party landowner group. While the appeal was proceeding at LPAT, City Council approved the Bramley Mobility Hub secondary plan in September 2019. Therefore, the OPA 133 that applied to this property was not able to be incorporated into the Bramley Mobility Hub secondary plan. Today, Mr. Chairman, the third party who appealed the OPA 133 has withdrawn its appeal, and the OPA 133 is now in effect. We are simply interested in applying for a site-specific OPA that enables implementation of the development vision for the Bramley Mobility Hub secondary plan. Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, the Planning Act requires a 2-year moratorium on any site-specific OPAs to a secondary plan that's approved by council. So therefore, the staff report before you tonight, Mr. Chairman, is to recommend exemption to that 2-year moratorium. I'd be happy to speak on the staff report, but I understand from the city clerk that there may be an amendment to the recommendation in the staff report. So maybe I'll wait for that amendment to be tabled before I can comment on that. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see Councilor Fortini is on the board. Go ahead, Councilor. Oh, the staff, sorry, Peter.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to advise that the highlighted recommendation 2 on the screen is the revised recommendation as provided by staff. It is different than what's in the published staff report, and we understand this is the intent that staff are providing for committee's consideration this evening.
Okay, so then I'll hand it over. Councilor Fortini, then you're on the board.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what I was going to say. The clerk clarified number 2 there. It wasn't in, so I was gonna add that, but it's already in there. So that's what I'm moving.
Okay, so we have a motion moved by Councilor Fortini regarding the exemption which is provided on your screen. Do any, so I see no further questions or comments. So if there's anyone opposed to the motion moved by Councilor Fortini to provide the exemption? No. So the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Peter, do you need me to read this out? I think that it carried already, okay?
No, Mr. Chair, it's fine. It's carried as shown on the screen.
Okay, thank you. We go now to item 6.4. Delegations regarding amending the zoning bylaw. Oh no, we dealt with this one. And item 6.5, we've dealt with that one. And we go now to staff presentations, item 7.1. And I'll hand this over to staff to do a quick presentation.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, it's Elizabeth Corzola. There was no prepared staff presentation for this. It is the site-specific amendment to bylaw 399/2002, and staff are supportive, looking for council support on the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. So I see no questions or comments. So I do have a motion moved by Councillor Williams that the report titled Site-Specific Amendment to Sign Bylaw, Peel Standard Condominium Corporation, Torbram Road, Ward 7 to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18, 2021 be received, and that a bylaw passed to amend signed bylaw 399/2002 as amended to permit the proposed site-specific amendment. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. Chairless, are there any opposition? No. So thank you. There are no objections, so the motion carries. We go now on to item 7.2. Regarding an application to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw, proposed draft plan and subdivision, Canaf County side of Credit View, south of Buick Boulevard, Ward 6. Do any members have any questions or comments? No. Okay, so I have a motion moved by Councillor Palashi to approve the staff report. That the report titled Recommendation Report Application to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw, proposed draft plan subdivision, Canafcon Limited, 1073 Credit View Road, Ward 6 to the Planning Development Committee meeting of January 18th. That official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision application submitted by Canafcon Limited on behalf of 2639509 Ontario Limited, Ward 6. Be approved on the basis it represents good planning and is consistent with provincial policy statement, conforms to the growing plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the Region of Peel official plan, and the city's official plan for the reasons set out in the planning recommendation report. The amendments to the Fletcher's Meadow Secondary Plan Area 44, generally in accordance with Appendix 7 to this report be adopted. And 4, that the amendments to the zoning bylaw generally in accordance with the Appendix 8 to this report be adopted. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. Okay, there are no objections, so the motion carries. We now go on to item 7.3, staff report regarding zoning bylaw proposed draft of subdivision Canafcon. There's a report regarding the application of zone bylaw 115070 McBean Drive, Ward 10. Are there any questions or comments? No. Okay, so I do have a motion moved by Councillor Dillon to approve the staff report, and we'll take it as noted on the screen. So I'll give folks a couple of minutes just to avoid me having to read a lengthy motion. Okay, are there any objections? No, there are no objections, so the motion carries. We go on now to staff report 7.4, application to amend the official plan zoning bylaw proposed draft plan, subdivision Matthews Planning and Management Limited. So you have the report before you. Are there any questions or comments? No. So we do have a motion moved by Councillor Fortini, which again, I'll give you a couple minutes just to review the motion, which is on the screen before you. Okay, is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. There are no objections, so the motion carries. Item 7.5, staff report, we're seeking exemption. We've dealt with that, thank you. 7.6, staff report regarding Bill 108, amendments to the Planning Act, requiring municipalities to authorize the use of additional residential units and detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings. So there is a staff report regarding, are there any questions or comments? So I do see Councillor Bowman on the screen. Can you go ahead, Councillor Bowman?
Thank you very much. Through you, Mr. Chair, just a couple of questions. There's no real recommendations in this report other than that we're going to have a public open house to gain some input from the residents of the city. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay. Oh, who's that speaking?
It's Richard.
Oh, hi, Richard.
Councillor.
Regarding Bill 108 and the amendments to the Planning Act, are we looking at the amendments in Bill 108 that would allow 2 different second units within one residence, one within the house and one in an outbuilding?
That's correct. There's the act would allow for a unit in an accessory structure. So yes, we'd be looking at that as well.
Okay, and in your report coming back to us, are we considering at all looking at the number of units in any given neighborhood, or are we just going to, throughout our planning or lack of planning in this case, are we just going to allow these to spring up in every single townhouse or semi-detached that wants one?
So through the chair, so the purpose of the recommendation is to hold a statutory public meeting first before we come back with a recommended staff report. So yes, we need to understand the implications on servicing in terms of existing neighborhoods and so on and so forth. So that'll be part of the exercise, is to sort out what's the implication of allowing additional units within accessory structures and so on and so forth.
And that's within the municipality's purview as opposed to the province's purview?
Well, we certainly, I mean, Bill 108 is clear in terms of what it's trying to achieve. So we need to understand what the implication is on that and, you know, respond back to council on that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bowman. And I believe we do need, so if you're okay, I'll have Councillor Bowman move the motion to approve the staff report. Thank you. Are there any objections? No, so the motion carries. Our next report is staff report regarding peer review consultant for market analysis, inclusionary zoning assessment. Are there any questions or comments? No, so I do have a motion moved by Councillor Willens, and I'll give you some time just to review it on the screen. Okay, is there anyone opposed to this motion? Otherwise, your vote will count in the affirmative. There are no objections, so the motion carries. Committee, so cycling was already approved at consent. We've dealt with correspondence. Item 1.2, dealt with correspondence and councillor question period. Do any members have any questions regarding the planning and economic development section, or the planning and development section? No. Okay. And public question period. City Clerk, do you have any questions from the members of the public?
Mr. Chair, no questions have been received.
Okay, so can I now, our next meeting will be February 1st at 7 p.m. And can I get a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Vicente, that the Planning and Development Committee do now adjourn to meet again on February 1st at 7 p.m. or at the call of the chair. Is there anyone opposed to this motion? No? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. The meeting is now adjourned. Please stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, practice physical distancing, and wear a face covering. Good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee. We're just going to wait for the live stream to end momentarily.